and Dr. Adams. Okay.
All right, so the first order of business is the approval of the minutes. I'm gonna have a lot of windows open, so I'm gonna try to get to it. But well, Dorothy, if you have them, can I ask you to make that motion for the approval? I just don't have the title.
Yeah, I need to, let me pull that up real fast. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me either.
It's, I think
it's just, the motion just has to have the date, so that's what I'm looking at.
Yep.
Just
okay, I got them. So I'd like to make a motion to approve meeting minutes from for November 7th, 2019, December 6th, 2019, and February 7th, 2020.
I'll second.
Okay, any questions or discussion? All right, Ms. Bell, if you will.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Turk?
Yes.
Ms. Nolan? Ms. Nolan?
Yes.
Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Ms. Shahid?
Yes.
Ms. Banks?
Yes.
Dr. Adams?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't want to take us too far off track with the agenda, but I do want to make time for acknowledgement. So I do want to thank Dr. Adams and Ms. Banks for the information that you all provided. And I know I had a bunch of requests for it, but getting that information to me in the template that was provided to be able to provide to the committee as a whole, I personally found it very helpful. And I hope it's something that, as we talk about it today, that the Board of Education finds helpful in the decisions that they have to make going forward. I want to thank Dorothy for making sure I adhere to the Roberts rules and admit, as I sure would have neglected to do so. And then I also want to thank those who were able, so Gloria, Casey, and Susan, for your input and just having that conversation that we had. And of course, there'll be more on that once we get to the policy, but being able to have that honest, open dialogue to be able to help move the district forward. And again, thank you to everyone for being here and taking the time out to do it. Dr. Adams, thank you to your team for making it something that's available online and something that we can still do even in the age of social distancing. So without further ado, I want to move to the first document. So the first document that I wanted to talk about was the budget forms report. I will talk about the purpose of the discussion that I hope we can have. So the report was completed by Ms. Banks and her team. I created the template, and the template was created to see what items in terms of the budget form report, and this is the same for the budget process report, what items might be helpful in future considerations of the purpose of this committee and the work that the Board of Education will do around budget. So that information was provided. I wanted us to look at that information. And then, as you can see in the second part of that information, the first comment is from, I believe, Ms. Banks or members of Ms. Banks' team in terms of what recommendations would be going forward from this particular process. I added in my own recommendations after that, and I did that on both of the reports. The goal is for us to have a discussion about those findings, what's presented. If there were comments, I know I got some via email that I tried to put in there, but if there are additional comments or suggestions, the goal is for me to get that information, write that down, to comprise a final report, which we would approve together in our June meeting, and then have a final report to present to the board along with the budget process report. So just want to let everyone know that's what the purpose of that is. So right now, I'll just entertain any questions, comments, or additional suggestions that you have after reviewing that report.
I have two reports to the board. One of them is the full budget hearings. The other one is the budget development process.
So it's the budget hearing. Sorry, I said forums. Guess the language is hearings.
Fall budget hearing.
Correct.
I guess I have a question.
Mhm.
Under information presented, goals and aims of presentation, it says to provide more community input and transparency on how public funds are spent. The community input part is presented by the community, not the district, correct?
I don't know who that question is directed toward.
At you, Adam, since you wrote this, and my having it, we all attend these forums, and the district makes a presentation about what is in the budget, and then they open the mics for the community. Now, sometimes people make suggestions. Sometimes they come to vent about a problem at their school. If we're going to have forums that are focused or supposed to be focused on actual community input, that has to be made clear so that the people who are there because there's a problem at their child's school aren't taking up time at the mic where what we're doing or what we want to be doing is actually hearing community making suggestions for how district funds should be dispensed. Is that correct?
So are you referring to the sub-bullet point of goals and aims of presentation under
Yes.
information presented?
Yes. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, so I did not put that there,
Oh,
if I'm correct, right, Ms. Banks?
Correct.
Yeah, so I just, the template I created, and I can be more explicit. So I put, so the things in bold, so 2019 data and analysis there, as well as those sub bullet points in terms of, well, what was provided in the additional files. And then for information presented, I just thought the two key pieces that would be helpful for the board would just be the goals and aims of those hearings, of the hearings, and then just like a general overview. So I just created those spaces, but I did not put that sub bullet.
I guess then what I would like to do is suggest
Okay.
that sub bullet be divided so that there are two things going on at goals and aims of presentation. The first one traditionally has been the district providing information about the budget. And then a second one would be the community providing input on the budget, which I see as two different things that go on at our budget forums generally. And I'm making a suggestion that in publicizing the forums, and somehow I think this has, this would perhaps make them more efficient, or perhaps there needs to be a separate forum for people who have to vent about something or want to vent about something. That's not what should be going on at these budget forums. In other words, this is strictly something to deal with how the district spends its money. So I'm suggesting that we clarify the language on that.
Okay, noted.
Okay.
Other questions, comments, suggestions for, and it doesn't have to be around the, I guess, information that you have in front of you necessarily, but if there are suggestions that are coming to mind that you have for budget hearings or forums that are not represented at all, now would be the time.
I have a question. this fall budget hearings, is that connected to the budget forums, marketing, outreach efforts document?
Yes.
And when I look at that document down there where the attendance is, down there, they said these are only those who opted to sign in.
Mhm.
So there were greater numbers of people there than what are reflected on this document.
Possibly.
Okay, and the reason why I'm asking is we're doing a lot of work because we're saying that there are just people out there that really want to be involved in this process and know what's going on in this process, but people don't seem to be showing up. And maybe you could help me with that, or somebody who could help me with that.
Yeah, I think that was a concern that was brought up. I don't know if it was in our first or second meeting. And I don't remember who on the committee made the point that people will show up to something that they feel they have a voice in. And historically, if I'll speak from the I, but if I felt historically that maybe I've shown up in the past and I don't feel that the presentation was catered to me, or if I look at the outreach and it doesn't seem that because of what is going to be discussed, I'm actually going to have much input in, then I'm less likely to show up. But if I'm just showing up, so I think the people that we're talking about, that segment of people who we say want to have a voice but don't show up, probably don't feel like if they do show up, they're still going to have a voice. So I think that does speak to the point that Susan made about, well, maybe there needs to be some delineation between the purposes and the goals of the sessions that we hold. So if we are having a session specifically just to listen, and then we have a separate session to gather input, maybe those don't exist in the same session.
So we're kind of basing this whole thing off of some silent majority that's out there that we haven't heard from.
That's possible, but it's also possible that we've heard from them and we just haven't listened.
But see, I just deal with a lot more tangible things, you know, and I'm not trying to make light of the work we're doing, but it seems like to me that we're working on some stuff to create some stuff that's already there.
No, that's not from my vantage point, the point of it. I think that
I don't know who that is.
This is Gloria.
Hi, Gloria.
Gloria Nolan, how are you?
I'm fine.
Great. Can you see us?
I could see Susan and Angie and
Okay.
Adam.
You might have to swipe, but
there you are.
yeah, so I was just referencing the point that Adam brought up as a community member and as a parent of students in the district. What we did when we started with our process, we got out and we talked to community members. Budget came up a lot, and the overall sense that I got from it was people didn't really have an understanding, myself included. And so there was lack of understanding and lack of input. And so with those two things combined, there's going to be a natural lack of buy-in. And so the overall reason for this process is to push forward with the district to, create this relationship where there's an understanding on behalf of community members. There's an opportunity for community members to be involved in the process at some point, and to get that understanding that people were lacking. And when you don't understand, you feel like, okay, here's a big book, it's 200 pages. I don't understand it. It's going right over my head. Like, why would I show up? So the idea is to simplify it, make it available so that people can understand it, or, change the methods and breaking it down so that people understand, and make sure that people know when it's going on, and that when they do show up, there's an opportunity for them. So
I
that's
just
what
want to,
that's what I just
go, yeah, I just want to go on record that I too am a grandparent of children in this district. I too am a community member. I'm a taxpayer, as well as what I do to make a living as a teacher in the district, and right now on special assignment to the union. But I'm just trying to say, if I'm looking at this on the face of this, I'm perplexed to understand that there are all these people out here that want to do something, but we're just saying that they're out there somewhere and we're trying to move towards them, and I just don't see that. Like, I see that there are comments in here from you at this October forum, but in September and in November, some of the comments was like Susan said, these were people that had something else on their mind.
well.
Can I say something? As someone who has been going to district public budget forums for going on 25 years now, if they hand you a 200-page book, they don't want you to ingest the information. They're trying to intimidate you into just walking out the door. I've seen line item budgets for this district, and they're not 200 pages. Enos Moss used to show them to us, and they were highly detailed, but they were only a few pages of just lots of detail that people could get their arms around. So there are ways of providing information, and there are ways of providing information. The kinds of pie charts that we started getting with the SAB were almost no information. They were just broad categories of how district money was being spent without really telling us very much at all. And I would hope we would get back to some kind of a mean that existed before the SAB and PowerPoint presentations, where we actually had more information, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And these forums have never been attended by large numbers of people. I think what we've experienced in the last year and a half or so is a couple of community groups who thought it would be a good idea if more people in the community attended budget forums, and they galvanized people to come to board meetings to demand that. But how many of those people actually really wanted to come to budget forums is questionable, because they didn't come last year.
It's not, wait a minute now, I have to
let me finish.
on it. Okay,
I do believe that if people have a sense that their input matters, that they will come if they have input to provide. And in order for people to have input to provide, they have to be given information in the first place. So I would like to see something coming out of that allows there to be more information to provided parents on different levels. The kind of simple, easy to understand, maybe PowerPoint stuff that you guys have been doing for the last 10, 12 years, but also the line item stuff per building and district-wide for those parents who want to get their arms around that, so that people have a reason to provide input. Because once in a while, not often, but once in a while, somebody might actually come to a forum with an idea that the administration didn't think of, that's actually a good idea. And that input, there ought to be a mechanism for that input to be provided and given serious consideration. And that's what I'd like to see come out of this.
Gloria?
I just wanted to say it wasn't just about the galvanizing of community members for just to show up at the meetings. It is to, like I said, gain that understanding. We did a campaign around this, quite frankly, because there's a lot to be desired. People don't understand. And so when we talk to community members through canvassing, like knocking on doors, talking to people face to face, doing phone calls, and we had over 800 letters of support from community members saying that, yes, this is something that should be available. And by the time some of the things that we requested in our demands were to have the dates and times publicized and shared with families broadly. Like, I think prior to our push for this, the information was coming out, but it wasn't very, it was just kind of like, okay, we had this meeting on this day and it was just another meeting, but it wasn't a lot of activity around it or any special attention given to it so that people would say, hey, you know, put your eyes on this thing, and then here's some information beforehand so you will understand and you will be a part of the process. So that's what the push is. And it's not imaginary people or 2 or 3 silent majority or anything like that. I'm just bringing up that there were over 800 people that signed letters of support.
I signed one of those letters, so I'm with you, Gloria.
And got behind this effort to provide transparency in the budgeting process, because there has not been transparency in the budget. That's it.
And then I did also want to close to what you said, Mr. Cummings, about creating new things for this imaginary or silent majority. I don't necessarily think that it's about creating something new, because again, when we looked at it, it was just like, what is the vision? What is the purpose? What are the goals? So I don't think it's necessarily creating something new. Numbers are numbers, presentations are presentations, but the newness would be in how we think about presenting that information. The newness would be about how we think about getting that input and what we actually envision the relationship being between the general community member and the people responsible for maintaining district finances.
No, I didn't mean to imply anything like that. All I'm saying is I'm for simplification, because a lot of things I get into and budget and those things I don't get into because of the complications of it. So I'm all for simplifying things to make it easier for whoever is looking at or whatever. But I'm just saying that it was based on the assumption, the impression that I got initially was that there were people out there in the community that were wanting this process to be changed. And then when I didn't see the numbers there, that just wasn't fixed in my head, kind of, you know. And I know about knocking on doors and all that stuff and community organizing, because that's what I've been doing over here at the union all the time. We do community organizing. I know how these letters get generated, and I know how all that stuff is done. And I'm just trying to say, I'm just trying to be straight about it. If we want to simplify it, let's simplify it. But let's not say that there's some overwhelming silent majority out there that is really clamoring for this information, because I just don't accept that premise. And then I'm done with that. We can move on.
Noted. Any other comments on the budget hearings report? And I have taken down notes that I will include into suggestions for the final. Yes.
So I have a question about recommendations moving forward. The second bullet for that says that the information reviewed was not well received or understood by the persons who attended. So I'm curious, like, what are we basing that in? How are we, like, what data are we using, or how did we interpret? I guess where did that statement, what is it rooted in?
Well, this is Angie, and I actually made that comment. And I really am basing that on many of the comments, or at least some of the comments that came up over the various forums was the inequity in the distribution of funds. And again, it kind of goes back to the complexity, which things have gotten more and more complex over time. When you consider all of the different regulations and all the different pots of funds that schools have access to, there can look like inequity on the surface, but once you dig into details, the understanding comes out. So I think that really speaks to some of the simplification, and I'd be happy to work with you, Susan. Seems like you have an idea of what that might look like. So we're certainly looking for ways to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, Angie, and I would be happy to try to work with you on that. I know it's not easy.
Would it be possible to add into the report then just kind of where that came from? So this, based on feedback or questions heard at the forum, the information wasn't received, just so we know where that phrasing is stemming from.
Yeah, I can add that in if you want to give me a blurb or some language around that, Ms. Banks, I can put into the final report.
Will do.
And I'd also like to be a part of it. I do have some ideas on, pulling out that information. I do believe that there are multiple sources of funding coming in, and so making sure to include those sources and then breaking it down in a way that is digestible. It is very, very important. And so I would like to have that conversation along with you and Susan and Angie, if possible.
And the other aspect of that is that we all know that, under Jim Crow, under institutionalized segregation, that there was inequity. Historically, there was inequity, and I think it's important that that be acknowledged, that a distinction be made between what was then and what is now. And that this is something we're going to have to do as a school district for some time, until people get it into their heads that there really is a difference between what the policy was in the bad old days and what the policy is now, especially given the fact that we now have seen, our leadership is African American. You don't want to be inequitable. It just isn't. It's no longer part of district policy, and it's no longer in our hearts.
And I think along with that, Susan, not just if the perception is incorrect, prove it. And so, as you're saying, making sure to point to all of those things and bring that out, and then there should also be fruit from that proof. So there should be some key indicators that things are working in an equitable fashion at schools across the district, not just certain pockets.
Well, it needs to be part of those annual budget meetings. The explanation for how the money is spent, that's the proof of the equity issue. And it will need to be emphasized plainly and clearly for years to come in order to change the misperceptions that the community has. It's all part of educating. It's all part of the transparency issue.
Right. Any further questions, Dorothy?
No, okay.
All right, so I want to move on to the second report, which is the budget process report. And as you are pulling it up or flipping to it, just for additional context, the purpose of this report is just to give us and the board insight into some processes and considerations that go into developing the actual budget. Of course, most of it is state mandated, but in a way that just seeing the report in a way that might help to influence recommendations and decisions. And again, I want to thank Ms. Banks and your team for making sure that when we think about the process moving forward through these times, that we are considering the impact of COVID-19. But I will open it up right now to suggestions, comments, questions.
Where's the budget process? I'm looking through the documents that I have. Was that included in the last correspondence?
Yes, it was.
What is it titled?
It's titled Report Budget Development Process.
Okay, here we go.
I think that this report would continue the discussion we were just having about equity. You know, one of the sub on funding limitations, constraints, legislation that may impact our revenue and expenditures. That should include an explanation of Title I requirements and regulations. And I'm not as familiar with the other titles and how they affect funding, but Enos Moss taught me a lot about Title I. Down under budget recommendations, again, it says budget finance requirements are complex and not always understood. Then it's up to us to explain. And so you're educators, and as educators, it should be built into the budget development process that when you're talking to people who are not part of the process or who you are bringing into the process as you know, new stakeholders, that you're educating them. And I know it means taking more time and energy, but it'll pay off in the long run. There's another thing I guess I'd like to ask about, and that is also under budget development, the subpoints. There's one, challenges in the budget process, increase operation cost and lower enrollment. There's something self-defeating about assuming that we're always going to have to deal with lower enrollment, that is going to be a continuing trend. And while it is currently a challenge, if it is going to be if we want it to cease to be a challenge, then part of addressing it means coming to terms with ways to reverse that trend, so that we're no longer dealing with lower enrollment. Enrollment starts growing again. And I really feel that the district needs to come up with strategies for combating the charter schools, the attractiveness of charter schools, and misconceptions that people have in the community about the quality of education that we get. And I know we're doing that, but we're not obviously doing enough if we're still losing kids. So I'd like to see that no longer be a challenge, other than challenging us to find a way to reverse it. I hear nothing in return. Am I tilting at windmills?
It's well received by me.
Yeah.
I agree with Susan. I continually hear about lower enrollment as if it's inevitable, but I don't hear any conversation around how we're going to, in this new normal, compete for parents that will bring their kids and trust them to us.
I mean, there's a charter school that closed last year, one closed this year. We're always here, and we will always be here, and we must make that clear to people. And we shouldn't be the choice of last resort. We're here for everyone in the city, And the charter schools aren't. They come and they go.
I hate to make the comparison between us being a business, because I don't think the whole business model is appropriate. But in this particular case, if we were competing for business, you know, we wouldn't be in business very long, because all we're doing, like Susan says, is waiting to see who shows up on our doorstep.
Well, I would think that our communications team would disagree with that. As you noted, we certainly do have some strategies that are in place that our recruitment team has been working on for some time. Certainly we'll share this information and perhaps bring some of those strategies to the committee at the next meeting.
All I can say is my grandmother told me the proof is in the pudding. And whatever the efforts are, I'm not trying to throw any bricks, but evidently we are continuing losing ground, and the stockholders wouldn't be standing for it if we were a company.
I have a question about the last bullet under the budget recommendations. Could you elaborate a little on the idea of expanding the areas of focus for the foundation?
Yep, so that one was one that I put there. So I know that the foundation gets funding for, or can allocate funding that they receive for early childhood education, college and career readiness. There might be a couple others that I'm not fully aware of. I do know that when it comes to, you know, early childhood is super important. College and career readiness also super important. But I know that those are pots that a lot of other organizations try to dip into. And while we are receiving funds for that, I also feel like if those are and again, I know there are other areas, but like if those are the two areas, if those are the only lanes that the foundation is advocating for funds for, looking for funds for, while that is great, I feel like opening up that avenue and trying to diversify the funds that come in and that they're going for, and making the case for that would be helpful, because I think, yeah, it looks great when they have their report and it says, you know, we're able to do this with the funding with early childhood and with this with college and career readiness. I would just like to see that portfolio broadened to, I don't know if it's you know, 7th grade math scores, 6th grade math scores, or 3rd grade reading, or whatever it may be, but looking at different, like, what else can we promote in a way that says, yes, this is something that we also find important and is not the norm, because you have, you know, a bunch of college access organizations that are vying for that funding. I used to run one of them, so I know that there are a lot of people saying we're doing college access. And of course, the district has to do it as well, but I think it would be great if the foundation starts to look at, or if they already are continuing to look at and promote, what are those other areas that we know the district needs support in and might not be able to get that funding for. I'll just give a hopefully quick example. Dr. Adams, we were talking about, or you were giving us information about what state funds could be used for, and then in conjunction with the ratio, the teacher-student ratio and building enrollment, and then figuring out, well, could we pay to have staff there that are support staff, and maybe they're not necessarily teachers, but they are playing a significant role in facilitating the learning environment. So how do you have that person there but not call them a teacher? Or even if you have them there and call them a teacher, then that takes away another teacher. But if the foundation were providing, like, you know, maybe they're providing a salaried position for an academic resource. I can't make up a title off the top of my head. But, you know, even if it's personnel or specialized programs that are in our schools that help to facilitate what teachers are doing in classrooms, what counselors are doing outside the classroom, but we can't get district funding for. So looking at all those things, we know, like, we can only spend state funding on these things and with these specific restrictions, and looking at the foundation as a way to say, well, because we have these restrictions, what areas can the foundation provide support that would be unrestricted, but still allow us to support students and still allow us to reach those outcomes that we want to reach.
So I think, for me, I feel like that needs to be explored a little bit more. And so I'm wondering if we could change that bullet point to maybe like pursuing opportunities to collaborate with the foundation or something along those lines, instead of that they should expand the focus. Because I think, our budgets are separate, and I think that would just need to kind of be worked through a little more, probably legally, going off of your examples, especially if we're talking about like working around state funding restrictions. So I think there are definitely opportunities to collaborate and find ways to work together. And so maybe changing the wording, that would be my suggestion, instead of going all the way to say expanding the focus, because I don't feel like I have enough information to make that recommendation.
And if I could add, if we're talking about going back a little bit, when we were talking about school closures and what we're going to do about that, or decrease in student enrollment, and if we're looking at the foundation as an option to explore alternative funding, why not look at innovation? Because one of the things that I think we're missing is a way to, I think, Ray, you touched on it, on how to capture or retain the students that we have, and also to capture students who are, for families who are trying to leave the charter schools, how to get them back into the district. And I think now is a good time for us to capitalize on those population of families who are running out of options, and using innovation. And I think we could do that with the current, buckets for the foundation. I don't know that we would have to change it to achieve our goal. If it is branding for our schools to create safe spaces and send that message out, if it's through innovative practices that we're doing this. But I think this is an opportunity for us to win some of our students and some of our families if we're very intentional about that. And we may start with a population of schools to do so. But what we do know is that what affects the culture and climate of a school is a strong school leader. So one of the pillars, I think, or one of the buckets of the foundation is school leadership. And so that's already, so what about incentivizing our school leaders, finding ways to use innovation creatively to capture students and do things that other districts are not doing, since we know that our population and our demographics and the socioeconomic status of our students are different. I just think that deserves a conversation to say, what are we doing? So I know it's noted in here that we know that is an issue. We are losing students daily. And what are we doing to make all of our schools attractive for students?
Perhaps I'm just a little bit slow, but we're talking about a foundation. I don't see that anywhere on the budget development process. Is that on here?
It's the very last bullet point on the page under recommendations going forward.
Okay, budget finance requirements are complex. The committee's role should be well-defined.
Mr. Cummings, there's two reports. So we're on the one that says budget development.
That's the one I'm on.
He's in the right one. You don't see two more bullets under that?
No, it says budget recommendation going forward. There are only two bullets. And the third bullet says completed by Adam.
Okay, so you might not have the final draft.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There was one sent yesterday, Ray, and it has two more bullet points on it. I wanted to ask to add a bullet point because there's nothing on here that deals with.
Let me go see if I can get mine, because I'm a little bit disturbed by this whole foundation conversation. Go ahead with what you're doing. I'm just going to go see if I can get the updated one.
There's nothing on here in terms of budget recommendations going forward that addresses the money that we lose every time the Board of Aldermen votes to give somebody a TIF or property tax abatement. And I would like to add something about that, that we need. And I know that our representatives on the TIF commission do vote against those things, but that we're always outvoted. And I just think that perhaps we need to educate the public at our budget forums as to the damage that's being done to us every single time the city approves, the Board of Aldermen, the TIF Commission approve one of these things, because then our parents, our stakeholders can put pressure on their political representatives to stop doing that.
We're ready.
Hey, Gloria, we're on the same page.
Hey, let's, exactly.
Can we add that? Can we add something to that effect?
Definitely put that in.
I did have a question about, oh, I'm sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Okay, I'll let you ask a question. I just wanted to go back to what Dr. Seal, Shahid, and Dorothy were saying. This is just my opinion, but again, my opinion is not the voice of the committee, so I will put all considerations in. I like the idea of changing it to looking for ways to innovate with the SLPS Foundation in the current areas that they serve, or the current buckets that they secure funding for. I'm more hesitant to just say that we want to change it to collaborate. I think it's pretty broad, and I think if I'm looking at that from the outside looking in and saying that the district is going to have a new goal to collaborate with the foundation, to me that brings into question, well, is St. Louis Public Schools and the St. Louis Public Schools Foundation not collaborating right now? But which I hope is not the case. But I think, yes, I think that's what I was going toward in terms of the innovation. So not just securing funding to continue to fund what we're already doing in the same way that we're doing it, but using those funds to figure out ways to be able to do things that we didn't think were possible because of the current structures and limitations of our funding and those funding requirements. So understanding that a foundation might have more lax or fewer restrictions on how we can spend the money, thus allowing for more innovation and creative thought around how we execute that.
Another piece is that there is some suspicion in the community, unfortunately, that the work of the foundation is not done in an equitable way. And I think that might need to be addressed as well, so that there's more trust regarding the work of the foundation and support for the work of the foundation and the outcomes that it makes possible for our students.
And you had a question, Gloria?
Oh, after she wrapped up, I did just want to hear a little bit more about the bullet above, right above the last one, about lobbying for change in the funding formula. If someone could say more, because is that the overall funding formula, the state? What could you just kind of spell that out a little bit?
Yep. So that was another one of my bullet points. So trying to keep it short. So I think that the funding formula is not an equitable one, and I think because it blanketly applies to all Missouri schools, it disadvantages SLPS and many other districts, and it changes so much, and it is pretty complex that it's almost like gambling with the budget that we have every year. So yeah, in short, I would just advocate for, if there are people who could look at the funding formula and are mathematicians that could strategize a way for it to be more equitable, that would just be my suggestion. Not a short-term thing at all.
Like not tying into property taxes,
That would be one thing.
Oh, okay.
And not to rant too much, but I think, if we are funding, if if we are funding our schools based on how many bucks we put in a seat, understanding that, yes, there is going to be if you look at the budget on a base level, there's going to be a dollar amount per student. But if the ultimate drive is to get as many people in the building as possible, and not necessarily, I'm not saying on the district part, but just like from a financial sense. And again, like Ray saying, you don't want to run it like a business, but if you're thinking in business terms, then the goal is to get as many butts in the seat as possible. That doesn't prioritize the educational needs and the educational equity needs of certain districts, neighborhoods, regions.
I'm sorry, I went to try to look for that document. I couldn't find it.
I will email you the file right now, Mr. Cummings. It was sent yesterday, so I'll send it to you right now electronically.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Adam, can I ask you in regard to changes in the foundation formula, are you at all familiar with the battles that we've had in Missouri over the foundation formula? That's, pardon?
Somewhat familiar. I've heard some things from some sources.
Yeah, because I mean, there have been several lawsuits where large numbers of school districts in the state have sued the legislature in an attempt to get them to repair the foundation formula. And no matter what happens, the legislature is the problem. They keep, even when they are forced by the courts to come up with a more equitable formula, then they don't fund it. I mean, even about 5 years ago, they cut the adequacy target. So the problems that we have with the state and their funding are so complicated. And quite frankly, I personally wouldn't trust the legislature that we now have to come up with a more equitable plan. As a community and as a state, we need to do something about the makeup of our legislature, so or the political philosophy that many of them adhere to, because a lot of the outstate legislators are former educators and they value their own school districts, but that doesn't mean that they value anybody else's school district. And it's just really, really complicated and inequitable. And I don't think it will change until there is a groundswell of change in this state that will change not just how education is funded, but just about everything. This is not Massachusetts, where you have like the highest funding for education in the country. It's the exact opposite. It's frustrating. I wish it wasn't like this.
All right, so I will wait till Mr. Cummings comes back with his updated draft before we move on from the budget process report. But if there are any other questions, comments, concerns, considerations, I want to make sure the floor is, or leave the floor open for that. And I will also say that while we're waiting, if there are considerations or things that come up for you after this meeting is over, you can still feel free to email that to me. And I can still work that into the final drafts. Mr. Cummings, we haven't moved on. I did want to keep us on this target. I did want to keep us on this target while you just got your document in case you had any.
I'm good. I'm ready to go. Here's what I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think that these budgetary recommendations going forward, we're trying to look at where we're going to get our most bang for our buck, is how I look at it. And I just looked at this really quickly. And from my point of view, I think the most bang for our buck comes from trying to recover the reverse Robin Hood money that has been taken out of our district by various TIFs and other kinds of schemes that went on. And just like with lobbying strategy for changing the foundation formula, as Susan said, that's a much bigger lift than trying to recover some of the money that's already due to us through the different things that go on down there at City Hall with those politicians and how they're willing to give away our kids' milk money to businesses and other folks to fatten their coffers. So I would just say that I would recommend that we had something there that had something to say about how to look at TIFs and those things and how to be able to, other than that TIF committee, to have some vehicle where we have more leverage. That's a 9-person committee or something. And we only have 2 people on there, so you're gonna lose every vote. So you have no way to win with that particular method. And it's a lot more money that is due to us from there than we can either recover from the foundation, from the change in the funding formula, or from expanding the foundation. That is money that's already owed to us that's just been given away to somebody else.
Understood. And I added that to the notes.
There's some language in the board's legislative agenda that we might be able to use here for around supporting, I don't remember what the wording is, about changes to the TIF stuff. We may be able to look there.
Because it's my understanding that the law somehow changed. You know, it might have been just some off the scuttlebutt, it could be something I dreamt. But I thought that school districts could receive money themselves. I don't know why they had to go through a third-party foundation. I don't want to hold this up. Let's move on. But if you just add that to your notes, that would be good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't know if Dr. Adams or Ms. Banks wants to respond to that. I feel like that's a good question about schools not being able to receive the funds themselves, but having to go through a foundation to get them.
So the foundation was put together prior to me being here as superintendent, and funds can go directly to the district. Historically, philanthropic groups have not been supportive of providing those dollars to the district for a number of different reasons. The foundation is viewed as being independent of 501c3, and so a lot of the groups feel much more comfortable providing dollars directly to them because there has been a history of dollars going to the foundation obviously providing dollars to the district. Over the last 7 to 8 years, it's when the foundation has been able to gain some momentum to raise dollars. Prior to that, there were minimal dollars being raised to support the district for a number of different reasons. And again, I won't get into all of those. I do want to add one piece here. The foundation raises dollars based upon their collaboration with the district in targeted areas. And so the areas that Mr. Lang indicated, college and career, health and wellness is another area, early childhood education has been the area that administration has said, these are areas that we feel are critical to supporting students in our district. And so that's why those areas are there. Obviously, if the board thinks that some other areas need to be looked at, then I think it's possible for the foundation to switch and try to raise dollars in those areas. The foundation spends anywhere between, and on a year-to-year basis, because I just looked at the budget with Mrs. Donahue today, next year they'll be looking to spend about $3.8 million to support the district. Just to be clear about it, that's less than 1% of the district's budget. That's less than 1%. So I just want to be clear that if there is an interest to ask the foundation to do something different in terms of themes or areas that they want to focus on, the foundation obviously will be willing to kind of look at those things. And can you ask for dollars to go directly to the district? The answer is 100% yes. But there has to be some mechanism in place for that to take place.
And that's precisely what I'm saying, because I'm old enough. Sometimes when you're old, you know too much. But I know exactly when the foundation was set up, 1998, how it was set up, who it was set up, and how all that happened. And all I'm saying is, perhaps you should, sometimes you don't need a third party when you can get something yourself. And as far as that whole business, when people say that they feel more comfortable with giving their money to them than giving it to the district, all you have to do is look at the color of the people who've been running the district during that time and contrast that to the other side of what the color is on that. And I think my point is well made. They don't trust the people that's running it, primarily because they're African American. I said it and I won't take it back.
Noted. And I'm going to clarify too. So to your point, Dr. Adams, about, I think I forgot the number already, but 1.279, forget. How much will the foundation be given? I think you said 3. I don't remember the number.
I think they're going to spend about $3.8 million this year.
Okay.
On projects that are aligned to requests that have been made by the district.
Right. And so I think my point was, or I didn't want it to get confused. So I think I'm not saying that, you know, if the foundation can raise about $4 million to support the district every year, I'm not saying, all right, let's split that and do like 10 different things now. And we're doing 2. I'm more saying, if to Dr. Seal Shahid's point, like, okay, can we use that to innovate? 1, but 2, not splitting the funds into new projects, but saying we're getting these funds because of the projects that we're choosing to support, or the buckets that we have. If we added another bucket, would that open up more dollars that we can get in? So like, for example, if someone's like, yeah, I don't really want to give $1 million to college and career readiness, but I might give $1 million to, I don't know, shop class.
STEM.
Right.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right.
So not shrinking, the areas that the current money goes to, but exploring new areas to bring in additional funding, so to speak. Okay.
Duly noted. Widen the portfolio. Gotcha. All right.
Right. All right, so moving on to the last piece, or second to last item, is the policy recommendations. So just to be transparent and clear about the process, so a few of us met to talk about a potential policy recommendation for this committee. The goal was to, 1, look at existing policy. However, we can find any existing policy that was like this, or existing policy that made sense to evaluate. And I want to be clear that we didn't sit down in the session and write policy. So I did take it upon myself to craft this based on the conversation that was had. And I do appreciate that conversation. So it wasn't really a policy conversation, but honestly, I felt like it was an extension of the budget conversations and the equity conversations that we've been having as a full committee, but just being able to vision further and see what we would like to be true. And I would say at the heart of the conversation, just so that everyone is aware, at the heart of the conversation wasn't, we need to create a list of things for the district to do, and for Dr. Adams to implement, and for Ms. Banks to take on, and for the board to agree to. The heart of the conversation was, in what ways do we see ourselves as community members being part of this conversation, and in what ways do we think that we can assist the district in its mission, and assist the board in its mission. So based on the suggestions from Dr. Seal Shahid and Gloria and Susan, I took a stab and I took all their notes down, and I've never crafted a policy before, so if it looks crazy, I apologize. But I took a stab at what a policy would look like based on just the fruits of that conversation. And then the last thing I'll say before I open it up, this is not something that we're saying we want to prove now. This is something that a lot of us are seeing for the first time this week. And it's just a conversation about, just a conversation to start. So with that, I'll just open it up to questions, comments, concerns, and recommendations. But as you're going through it, I forgot to mention too, so as you're going through it, Ms. Banks and Dr. Adams, we wanted to make sure that you were able to tell us like what seems feasible, what doesn't seem feasible at all. And we want you to be honest and open too. But also more than that, like what you think is actually helpful for what you have to do and what you see as moving the district forward.
Adam, I had posed a question in my email that I sent concerning what is the present policy now around this, and if we didn't have one, I didn't get a response.
And I apologize for that. But yes, to restate, no present policy that I saw that encompasses engagement and involvement.
Did you have the board's attorney to research in board policy as to whether there was anything out there that
I
you
did
might
not
not know about? Is it possible that we could get an answer from them if there is something on the books now that this will replace this or something?
I can add that to my to-do list and put it on our agenda for June. And if I get anything between now and June, or whatever answer I get between now and June, I'll make sure I forward that to the entire committee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Adam.
So there is no policy that I am aware of that directly talks about budget engagement, but we do have several policies that I do not have in front of me. I'm sorry, I didn't pull the numbers, but we do have several policies that guide the overall, I guess, like the big umbrella of community engagement and how the district is supposed to work with families. So there are some policies out there about community engagement and the role that the district wants the community to play.
Could it be possible that we could get access to those?
Yeah, I'll work with Adam and try to coordinate pulling those once. I apologize, I don't have them in front of me.
Thank you very much.
I did have something under the dissemination of information. And so when you got down there talking about the dashboard under point number 2, the board and district shall ensure that a real-time tool such as a data dashboard is available via the district website or other appropriate platform chosen by the district. And to that, I wanted to take some time to add, I guess, a little more specificity in that area of what should be included. And so I know in a prior meeting, I shared some like a policy draft from the Better Budgets, Better Schools campaign and things to include. And so there's a list, including the general fund, state funding, levy and other public funds, Title I, supplemental. So there's just a list that I wanted to make sure that I didn't know if it needed to be spelled out specifically in this policy, but that the dashboard should be it should be comprehensive, so that the story is being told of, where the dollars are coming from and how they stack up into the different budgets at different schools.
And to that point, which I wholeheartedly support, I would hope that that a complete budget, not just pie charts, but all the information that Gloria is asking for be provided in its complete form for the, what I talk about as a line item budget for those people who want to look at it, and it should be able to be made available to digitally at the very least. And it's not something that should be 200 pages. It's a lot of information, but it's not that much information.
Both comments noted.
Yeah.
I do have a question on, I guess, the dissemination of information. I think I've always had somewhat of a concern about the paper copies and kind of like what the expectations are. And then also about the real-time dashboard and really what the expectation as to what people are defining as real-time. So, I mean, just some, I think probably more detailed information that I just don't want to get hung up on later, just to make sure that we're talking from the same book.
Yeah, and I hear
will.
that, and I hear the call for detail. So I don't know much about writing policy, but one thing I do know is that you definitely want it to be, or I guess the standard is good policy is something that can be somewhat perpetual. And also there needs to be some flexibility. So what is real time today might be different in 10 years. And availability of resources might be different. So the first thing about paper copies, I think that in terms of it being made available, I didn't add specificity there because, again, I don't do the budget. I don't know how much it might cost to print a 50-page booklet. I don't know what space requirements allow for you to have. I mean, if that means that you need to have one booklet per family, I don't know what it looks to have upwards of 17,000 booklets available in what room and what space. However, and that's why I left that intentionally vague. So I think, you know, if someone wanted a paper copy, they should be able to get that. Now, the process behind that, I think, would be left up to the district and left to the board to determine whether that was adequate or not. But I feel like that vagueness there is left to allow the district to do what makes sense and what is feasible. Because, yeah, if we say, you know, we need 17,000 paper copies available at all times, that might not be something that is feasible, but we don't want to put that in the policy. And now you're adhering to this policy that's unfeasible. So that accounts for the vagueness there. And along the same lines, to your point, Gloria, I think there are buckets that we could outline. And to your point, Susan, too, there are buckets that we could outline. And I think if this committee comes to an agreement on what we believe those are, and I can put those buckets in the next draft and send that all to you, and we can have a discussion about that in June. That's fine. But along the same lines, like if Title I funding is something that's no more in 5-10 years, yet we have a space for that, and would the district be in violation of the policy if it no longer exists?
Policies can be amended, and they frequently are.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
so I think it's just striking that balance between not having to constantly amend, but also allowing flexibility and it to be long lasting.
I agree, Adam, about like the striking balance between being vague and being prescriptive, because it is a 5/7 vote of the board to change any policy. So not that that is an impossible hurdle by any means, but it is a time-consuming process. So we don't want to inhibit the work of the board by having to revisit policies repeatedly to strike things that no longer exist and detracting from like more pressing matters. So I think getting it as close, striking the balance as best we can with the initial policy is really important. So we're not revisiting it for all the reasons Adam has outlined.
I have a question. Ms. Banks, when we met, I think the last meeting, you talked about the district was already starting on the data dashboard, had been talking to a company. Is it fair that we would put any type of specificities on this? You know, item that we have not even seen a draft of, or even the headings or the titles? Because I'm wondering, like, is it possible to get information on the headlines, the point, of the data dashboard, and then even a draft of what it might look like, so that if we're asking for specificities, we know exactly what that might look like. And even if we're saying real time, maybe it would make sense if we could see what the district has already decided to put in the data dashboard. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
Sure. We've had several meetings with the vendor since the last, I don't know, I guess the last meetings, the last ad hoc budget committee meeting. We've probably had, maybe 5 or 6 meetings with the vendor. Right now, we're just trying to, make sure that the data is clean that they have. They have definitely created some kind of sample dashboards, if you will. And I think I can probably bring forth, maybe some samples for the committee to look at the June meeting. But I mean, it's basically all of our data that we house in our financial system. So trying to determine the type of reports will be, a major question as to what is the appetite of the community, because clearly we'll be using this product for other internal reports as well. So hopefully we'll bring something forward in June.
okay.
I do have a question to Angie's point of the current, like what, I just wanted to know what was the current process for disseminating that information in terms of the budget books. Like, is there a set number that's being printed yearly? Are they available upon request? How does that typically work? And then I think using that as a process to work from there. The overall idea, the spirit behind this is to make the budget information available in different forms so that parents can access that information. And so if they requested the Cliff Notes version, that's a one page or, a small pamphlet, or is it the whole document, or are they just okay to go to the dashboard, which does not exist right now? So making it available in multiple ways, and definitely coming into the 21st century of, that digital piece. But how's the book being handled now?
Well, right now, the budget book is, we just request a certain number of copies to be made based on historical need. A lot of that is internal, that we have the budget book made for, along with, we always have a few copies. We historically have not had requests from the public for the budget book, many requests. So typically it's done based on historical need. Of course, we had a lot more made this year because of the budget forums.
So Mr. Lang, I have a hard stop right now, but could I have a couple of minutes just for a couple of comments before I leave, please?
Yep.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. I do have a hard stop. I'm getting ready for another meeting. The tenor of this particular committee was really set up around transparency. And so I think what we want to do from an administrative perspective is to try to be as transparent as possible to make sure that parents and the community has as much information as possible. I would implore this particular committee, prior to making any kind of recommendation, whether it's around a policy or anything else, as a way of acting, quote unquote, as guinea pigs, if you will, or almost experts in this space, to challenge us around spending some time with you to learn and understand the budget better. I think if you understand the budget better, then you can make certain requests around dissemination of information and all of those other kinds of things. I think it would be helpful for this committee, and I'm sure Ms. Banks and myself personally will spend as much time as you need to walk through the budget in detail. What is general operating budget? What is local? What is title? What are the requirements around that? because I think it might benefit you in terms of making a recommendation that hopefully will impact and support the community that we all want to serve. But without having that information, I think you are making, or you might make recommendations that may not be in line with what people really want to get, whether that's the dissemination of information or in terms of a school-based committee to help make recommendations to the school. Are we talking discretionary dollars? Are we talking all dollars? But I think helping you understand all of those things, if the 7 or 8 people on this committee would do a really deep dive, I think it would be really important to help you make some recommendations around what this policy needs to say or not need to say. And to be honest with you, you may want to have a couple of other persons who are willing to spend some time to do a deep dive, which might help inform us around what a policy might be or how we might better engage the public around what they think they need to have. So I just kind of want to put that out there because I think the tenor of this meeting is around engagement. And without you understanding, having a better understanding around the budget, I think we are making you might make some recommendations that don't get to what you want to try to resolve, which is helping people understand the budget better. So I'll leave it at that because I do have a hard stop.
All right, thank you, Dr. Adams. I completely
you.
agree, and I think that goes into our next point. I know you won't be here for it, but I'll send an email about it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on that,
Dr. Adams.
you know, as far as community engagement is concerned, going back to the first subject matter of this report, public forums, under B, it says the district shall ensure the public forums are intentionally planned in a way that allows for receipt of feedback, receipt of questions, and a process to ensure that questions receive responses. Does that include receipt of feedback, receipt of questions? Does that mean receipt of input or receipt of suggestions from the community in terms of budgetary spending?
So my initial answer, sorry, I gotta plug in my charger. My initial answer is that it could, but again, that's one of those things in terms of, my crack at policy writing, first crack at policy writing is not to over specify what feedback means, what input means, so that if we say that it's, that can be interpreted as, all right, it's just a suggestion or only suggestions, or even if we list everything out, that it could only always be those things.
Well,
but I mean, we could change the language to include, but not limited to.
My concern is always that in order to increase engagement, in order for people to believe that they should engage with the district, what makes a difference is believing that they can make a difference. Mm-hmm. So that if they have an idea for spending money, in a more equitable way or spending money in a different way, that at least their idea will be given consideration. It may not be adopted, but the idea that they will have input, that their suggestions will not be disregarded out of hand, will make it more likely that people will attend these meetings and will participate and feel good about their kids being in our schools.
I hear that. And to play devil's advocate, we could also say, yes, we're going to consider your suggestions. Please bring us your plans. But the actions might not line up. So we can say we don't want your suggestions and disregard them, or we could say we want your suggestions and also disregard them.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But if you disregard them, if you don't adopt them, but you explain to that person in a respectful way why you didn't adopt them, and it might be because we don't have enough money. It's a great idea, but we feel that these priorities are more important than that, then at least you've had some engagement, and that person may become better informed about what's going on in the schools and will then become an advocate perhaps for better funding, because yes, your priorities are important, and it would be nice if there was enough money for additional priorities. There's all sorts of possibilities that come out of respectfully engaging with parents and the community that we're just not doing now, that I hope come out of this committee's process.
So what I'm hearing is, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, more informed responses. So if someone does come with a comment, a suggestion, a plan, that they're getting more than a thank you for your suggestion. It's more, we have considered it, this is what we think about it. If we're not going in that direction, here's why, or here's what we think.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not some, as a parent advocate, I understand that not everything that parents bring to the table is useful. We all have our concerns, especially for our own children. But sometimes maybe 1 out of 100 will be useful. And I think if people see that, that will create just more goodwill toward the school district. Even if it's only one idea out of 100 that gets adopted, people are more likely to engage because next time it might be their idea.
I hear that. Okay. Any other comments on this?
I just want to chime in about what Dr. Adams was saying about taking that time to do the deeper dive. And I just like in thinking about that, this process has been drawn out for quite a bit. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to do both. Take that deep dive and still move towards some concrete policy changes that are very necessary, because based on like the information that he shared before leaving the meeting, it would really stall to say, okay, we're stopping, we're going back, we're getting ready to take this deep dive. And, who knows when the next opportunity will come up for us to kind of continue to push. I think that it is a possibility for us to do both and not slow the process.
If I might chime in, the process is going to be what it's going to be because we're going to continue our work. It just doesn't make sense to me that because we don't have a thorough understanding, many of us, I know I don't, that are on this committee, that we're just going to say, we can't slow down, no matter if there might be an iceberg out there full steam ahead. And we saw how that turned out for the Titanic. So all I'm saying is, I agree with Dr. Adams. Those of us that are on this committee need to really be able to understand what it is that we're looking at to actually really make sense out of what it is that we're trying to put together and form a community that can get their hands around.
I get that too. I'm just saying that looking at the information that we have in front of us, we can see what's missing. And so I don't think that there's a need to, if the information is not there, if there are things that we're calling for, like specificity and how the budget is being spent, I think that could be addressed. That's something that should be addressed. And then if the process has already started to create the dashboard, then that information can be, the gaps need to be filled in, and that information can be included so that people can gain an understanding as we're also working through this process.
The other thing is that I think we all realize that the budget for next year is not going to be the budget that the board has passed. That the state that because of COVID, state revenues will be much lower than was planned for. And even though the foundation formula was intended to be fully funded this year, I sincerely doubt they're going to stick to that, and there will be cuts. That's going to fall into the board's lap in later this summer or in the fall. And next year's budget forums are going to be very difficult. I need to go back to that equity piece, because I strongly advise that in this budget statement on the public forums, there be the kind of language that I know I submitted to you, Adam, about educating the community about the criteria used for funding schools, so that the community develops an understanding that no school or group of schools are funded inequitably based on their geographic location in the city. The SLPS should educate the community that budgetary practices of the past during the segregation era are no longer practiced. All children, all students are equally valued and resourced in accordance with their needs to the greatest extent possible within the constraints placed by inadequate funding from the state. I'm going to be a broken record on that issue. And I have to tell you that after 9/11, 2 years later, there were budget cuts. And in the middle of the school year, the governor withheld, I think it was $60 million from SLPS. I don't know if you were here, Angie, when that happened. But Dr. Hammonds was maligned in the press. The district was, the board was accused of spending like drunken sailors. All sorts of inaccurate things were said, and it was used as an excuse for the state takeover. When every school district in the state had been cut, and because of the revenue shortfalls that resulted after 9/11. This is going to be similar, and the problem may last longer. It may take a couple of years before we get back to an economy in this state that allows even for the budget that was planned for this year. So we're going to have to work extra hard to make people understand why cuts are going to have to be made, and that they're being made in as equitable way as possible, and that we're not harming certain schools at the expense of other schools. It's going to be painful, and we're going to have to work harder to do it.
Thank you, Susan. And at that point, I want to say was not ignored. I did see that and read that. I still was wrestling with the policy language that would be around that, that wouldn't be procedural. So like, what would be the policy language to encompass what you said in your reply that wouldn't be stating direct actions that the district had to do? So making sure that it was still at the governance level and not at the, forget what the other word is.
If I can help you work on language, I'll gladly do it. I'm capable of editing my own writing down to whatever it needs to be edited down to, but I'm really concerned because I know if there is a political will to make this district look bad again, there are elements in our community and in the media who will take advantage of a situation we have no control over to put us in a bad light when it's not our fault. So we're going to have a job to do regarding this.
Definitely noted. All right, so it's 4:21. We do have one more item. This is more of an announcement and not really a discussion for now, but it's for later. So I did want to acknowledge in the founding document for this committee that ad hoc does not mean permanent. So the goal was for in the May meeting that the committee decides to recommend whether there should be a permanent or more permanent budget committee. So that will be something that we will be deciding on. And if you have feedback for that, feel free to email it to me, because I'll be putting together a document to, I guess, state that case for or against. And if you want your comments to be anonymous, that's fine too. I wasn't going to say this person said, just going to compile all the thoughts that everyone had, categorize it just so that when we review it, we're still going to have a discussion, because I value discussion. But just so that we would have a document to help organize just where our thoughts were in our frame of mind. This is a question for Dorothy, because I just don't know if there is a recommendation for I guess it would just be a budget committee then.
Yeah, it would need to be a standing committee, and standing committees have to be created by the full board. So
Okay.
there
So that would disband this committee and then recreate a new one.
Right. So the ad hoc creation is disbanded at the conclusion of its like completing the goals that was outlined for it, which would be like following this school year. And so final duty of this committee is a recommendation of whether it should be standing, but then the full board would take that recommendation to create what the standing committee was. So that, yeah, does that make sense? I feel like I lost when I was talking.
It made sense to me. That's what
Okay.
I thought it was, but
Yeah.
I'll open it up in case it doesn't make sense to anyone else.
So the conclusion of the ad hoc committee is the end of this, well, like now?
So-
And then we're just making a follow-up recommendation to create a standing committee that is more permanent.
So yes, the standing committee would be permanent and would continue from school year to school year. So this one was created to look at the budget development process, how we can provide feedback to the district to make it a more transparent process. And in the third thing, if I'm remembering all of them, the third thing was then should there be a standing committee for this, for a budget purpose?
I would like to make a recommendation. I don't know if we could extend the ad hoc committee, but I am in agreement with Dr. Adams of this committee. And even if it's a permanent committee, really understanding the budget, because I'm not sure that we achieved that. And I think, we went through the budget book and there was some questions and there were some answers, but I'm still not sure that I understand. So perhaps it's someone else in the budget department, because it seems as if Ms. Banks, like you said earlier, there are some things that are probably too difficult to explain. And so, it would take more time than the meetings that we were having. So it was not a thorough explanation. And so I'm asking that we have some time to, I don't know if we can do it at the same time as Gloria, kind of reference. I think we can make recommendations, but I think if we're to make, recommendations to, if it's around engagement and what the community wants, this committee would have to be very solid in terms of understanding the budget so that we can pass on the information to the permanent committee and respond to the community, in my opinion.
I think I agree with that to an extent, but I just wanted to raise up that the idea is for the community to also understand. So for us to learn in silos and then go and share with the community, I think it would benefit us and to learn in community. So that's what I was talking about, doing both. That's what I meant.
That makes
The overall goal is to have transparency. And so that's for everybody, not just a small committee, and then we can trickle down information to people. This is, yeah, learning should be public.
Angie, can I ask, if we are to take a deep dive, what would that look like?
That's a good question. I guess I would suggest like a workshop, if you will, and I mean, I have some thoughts in mind, but I guess we would probably want to come up with a outline to really identify the path forward, because there are just so many different avenues that this budget could, understanding the budget could take you down. So I think having a format that we could stay on task with, and it might be a series of workshops.
Can we, I know Miss Susan Turk referenced what Enos Moss used years ago, a 2-pager, 2 or 3-pager document outlining probably some of those bigger or most frequent line items. Is it possible to start there? If you even have that information, maybe, a smaller document, and then we, so that we can understand some things. I don't know. I'm just throwing some things out there.
If I might, I got bumped off, and Gloria, I respectfully disagree to your mischaracterization of getting more information. It's not that we're going to be working in any silos outside of the community or anything like that. Actually, what we're doing is we're trying to, as novice, become more knowledgeable about what the budget is. The more knowledgeable we are about it, the more empowered we are to even look at the data dashboard or whatever these other things are. So I would just say that I'm in agreement with just taking some time. We don't have to rush to anything here, just for the sake of having something done. And I just think that it just makes sense to me that a series of workshops or something like that, so that we know what we're actually talking about ourselves, so that we can actually make a better informed recommendation. It just makes sense to me.
So how would people feel about, so I know the intent was to make a recommendation about a standing committee going forward, but I would think that this committee could recommend to the board that the ad hoc be continued for an additional 3 or 6 or 12, however many months this committee would want, to make a recommendation to the board and saying, we've been meeting, here are the things we've covered. We've learned that there's more that we don't know that we need to learn in order to make a full, accurate recommendation regarding, X, Y, and Z things. And so the board could extend the ad hoc status to allow us to do this idea that Dr. Adams and Ms. Banks have proposed, and to just to extend this.
So move.
I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work.
So move.
Motion, but.
So I did think about that and consider those things. I think that's definitely an option on the table. And I think we can talk about it, we can sleep on it, think about it, and talk about it more in our June meeting. The way that I've been looking at it.
Am I not being recognized by the chair? Hello?
Not being recognized in what way?
Well,
He said so moved.
I said so moved. I'm trying to
There was no
wasn't a
motion on the
motion.
table.
There wasn't a motion.
Well, actually, the motion was the items that Dorothy just said. That's why I said so moved. Recommending extending the committee so that we could be better informed. And
Dorothy, did you make a motion?
I did not make a motion. I was,
There was no motion,
that's a
Mr. Cummings.
possibility, but if
What
someone,
I'm saying is, excuse me,
Ray
my,
made a motion.
my so move was to make a formal motion out of what she just said. I couldn't write it down, but what she just said, that's my motion.
so someone has to make an actual motion.
He just did.
Well,
And
I mean,
for the sake, out of respect for him, I would second it.
Okay, comments, discussions then?
So I'm sorry, I hate to be a stickler, but it does need to be stated, like, I move something, like.
I move that that we recommend to the board to extend the work of this committee so that we could better understand the budget through a series of workshops that were recommended by the concept recommended by Dr. Adams, and through the process that was just kind of laid out like a series of workshops by Ms. Banks.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, that opens up for comments, discussion. So as I was going to state, my comment and reason for us, or my recommendation for us thinking about it and considering what we might want to do in June and having this up for a vote in June is because, again, to Dorothy's point, in order for a permanent committee to be formed, that would mean that this committee is dissolved. So I think that the place that we are now, if I think about the reason for a standing committee, I think, in my opinion, that there is a reason for that based on the conversations that we've been having and the work that we've been doing. Understanding we haven't been doing this work for a long time, but I do think it is meaningful. So I do think this is something that needs to be permanent. Now, do we have all the knowledge and information right now? No. But I wonder how much sense it makes for us to continue for 6 months, become experts, and then also realize that we do need to make this permanent and then have a community. And then that's 6 months that another group or whatever group, I don't know if it would be the same people, but I highly doubt that it would be. But even if it weren't the same people, then that group would then have to get caught up to speed, and then they're missing out on 6 months of being able to do so. So does that mean that we have an official policy that goes to recommendation? No, but that is work that can be taken up by this permanent committee, and then that committee would be the committee that goes through the work of going through those workshops with Ms. Banks and understanding the budget more fully, understanding how that understanding can be applied to a well-crafted policy and future recommendations. So that would just be my consideration, not to sway anyone or say what we should or shouldn't do. And maybe that means we extend forward 2 months instead of 6 months or whatever. But that I just wanted to make sure that that was considered.
I would like for us to consider a time frame that is reasonable, because I do think that the community deserves that. And whether it was 800 people or 40 people, I don't think, if the purpose of this committee was about transparency, then I think we owe it to the community to move quicker and with a sense of urgency, because I think the longer we wait, it will look as if we're hiding things and hiding information. So I think that time frame should be placed on Ms. Banks' office, because this is her area of expertise. But I would like to see a time frame that's reasonable and a sense of urgency, and I think that is a reasonable request.
Dr. Shaheed, as the maker of the motion, I am very open to a friendly amendment to putting either 1 month, 2 months, or whatever you're feeling right now. I would accept that amendment because you're making a valid point. So would you like to make that amendment for me?
Yes.
Okay.
I am just not clear on the time frame because I am not certain of what the training would look like. So I don't want to specify a certain time frame myself.
Right, which is also why that's why I'm pushing for us to be able to request review and consider that information to make a more informed recommendation next month.
I want to just make sure we're all very clear that the committee can make the recommendation to the board to create this as a standing committee, but the board may or may not take up that recommendation, and they may or may not create it exactly the way the recommendation goes out. So there is some consideration, I think, that we need to give to whether it makes sense to extend the ad hoc with the current makeup that we have versus creating a new committee. Like, and again, like the board wouldn't necessarily have to extend ad hoc either, but I just think like we have to be clear that what we're doing is recommending to the full board, who will then take this up and has some degree of control over it. So if that factors into your decision on timeframes and things like that, like I want to make sure that's all very clear.
I have a question for Ms. Banks. Ms. Banks, after hearing the exchange between myself and Dr. Shahid, what would, in your professional opinion, be a length of time that would have the sense of urgency that's been expressed around the idea of transparency in the district and the community thinking that we're dragging our feet in order to get this done as expeditiously as possible?
That is a good question. Seeing how the meetings are available to the public, I think that whatever the plan would be available for the public to view, and they would be able to see the progress that's being made. We also have to keep in mind with any of the proposed budget forums, the resources that would be required on the district staff. This is certainly one of the most busy times for the finance staff at the end of the year. So all of that would have to be taken into consideration as well.
No, my question simply was, if we were going to have a couple of meetings or something like that, would it take longer than 1 month, 2 months before we could get to that? I'm just trying to get an idea of that time frame. Because see, on one hand, I'm hearing we got to hurry up and get this policy. And then on the other hand, I'm hearing when I'm saying, well, let's get more familiar. Well, you know, maybe we're rushing too fast to say that we're going to get familiar. So I'm just trying to take valid recommendations and try and frame them into something to move us forward on what makes sense. So my question once again, is it a month, 2 months, in your estimation?
And I have a question, is there a sunset on this committee?
So there
Okay,
was I'll have to pull up, I don't know how quickly I can do it. There was a guiding document for this committee that had like a outline, and the intent was for it to run the course of the school year.
Yes.
With
You
a
are right.
final recommendation made in June.
Right.
But also, I don't think anyone anticipated COVID. So, you know, like the intent was, and the outline for the time frame that the committee would run ended in June.
Yes.
Well, I would hope.
I'm trying to
that
find it. I'm sorry.
I have it pulled up. You want me to forward
Oh,
it
do
to
you?
you, Dorothy?
Great, thank you. Or you can forward it to the full board. That's probably, or the full committee. That's probably the most helpful thing here, so everyone can see it.
I would hope that the committee either be extended, or if it has to be ended and then a new committee formed, that the same people would be on it. Because I would hate for the work that we've done to sort of amount to nothing and a new group to start over from scratch.
So the board president can create ad hoc committees and appoint to ad hoc committees. So the difference is there is a distinct difference between ad hoc committees and standing committees as far as their creation and development. So just as a FYI.
I still don't think I got an answer to my question as the maker of the motion. Ms. Banks?
Yes, again, I don't know if I'd want to give a recommendation as to what's an adequate time frame. I'd probably just kind of go back to my previous response. I think a lot is going to depend on how much information the committee needs after the initial budget workshop would happen. And again, also based on the time and availability of the finance staff.
Dorothy, do you have a SparkNotes version of how standing committees are formed and how people get on them?
So they can be formed by the board president, or they can be formed by the board. The board president is the one that makes appointments to committees.
Point of order.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Adam. My apologies. I was reflex.
Point of order. I believe that what Mr. Lane just brought up is not germane to this motion. The motion that I made had to do with simply us having the ability to become more proficient in the budget itself.
And I disagree, Mr. Cummings, because if we did have the ability to make this ad hoc committee a standing committee, then that would completely change the motion.
So,
All I'm saying is, once again, the motion had nothing to do with a standing committee. You're entitled to disagree, but your disagreement has to be germane to the motion. All that I'm saying is this committee still is in session and will be for a short period of time. I don't know exactly how much the time is. And all I'm saying is our superintendent has recommended that perhaps we should become more well acquainted with the whole budget itself. And there was someone made a second that felt that way. And I heard someone else speak in favor of it. They just wanted to have some kind of time limit. So I would respectfully disagree that the conversation around whether it's standing or not is not germane to this motion. And I would like a ruling from the chair.
So, Mr. Cummings, if hypothetically we did extend for 6 months and then decided next month or found out that we could make this into a standing committee, then that 6-month extension would be void, which is again why I feel like it is germane to the motion at hand.
When is this committee to be dissolved? How long was this committee set up for?
As Ms. Rhodey Collins said, based on the guiding document, it's not an official dissolution of the committee in June, but it was expected to last that long. But obviously we have a global pandemic that interrupted many timelines. So there is no technical expiration date.
Then all I'm saying is, what's wrong with becoming more informed and knowledgeable about the process?
No one's saying anything is wrong with that. We're just trying to make sustainable decisions. That's all.
Well, we're trying to make sustainable decisions, but we want to make wise decisions that are based on our present information. Call the question.
I'm sorry?
I asked that the question,
You didn't ask, you demanded. So if you want to phrase it as a question, I'll wait.
No, I'm saying call the question under Robert's Rules of Order. Call the question means that the debate ends and that we vote.
And we are voting again.
Yeah, would you like to restate your motion?
Dorothy, could you reread the motion, please?
I can. So the motion is, I move that we recommend to the board to extend the work of the committee as recommended by Dr. Adams so as to hold a series of workshops, and that was seconded by Susan Turk.
And I'm perfectly willing to make, to take a friendly amendment, whether it's 1 month or 2 months, in order just to move forward.
Be another amendment also to include public, including the public in the workshop process. So making that available to the public.
I don't have any problem with that. As long as they're there with the decorum that the committee is having the committee and have whatever questions they want or whatever. But not just some kind of jamboree or something where it's a free for all or something like that. No.
No.
No one has specified whether we should be extended for 1 or 2 months. I would like to amend the motion so that the committee is extended indefinitely or as much time as it needs to complete its work.
Before becoming a standing committee, I think that, I'm sorry, I think that that was the point.
Which is again my point. So if we did extend it indefinitely, then there would, and that were, I guess, approved, then there would be no need, then it would essentially be a standing committee.
So I'm sorry, hold on, I'm sorry, I just need some clarification as secretary here. Susan, was that an amendment to include as much time as needed to complete the work?
Yeah. We have a specific charge for this committee. If there is going to be a permanent budget committee, its work may be more comprehensive than ours.
I'm willing to accept the motion to have the public be included, just like right now, this stuff is on YouTube. I guess people can look on there and see it. But I don't want this to go into however long it needs to go. I would like for it to be either 1 month or 2 months. If somebody's willing to make that 1 month or 2 months,
I'll
I'm
say
willing
2
to accept
months.
that.
Then
2 months?
2 months.
So,
Okay, I accept that friendly amendment.
hold on, you all are, I'm just trying to make sure we're following procedure. So I did not hear a second to Susan's amendment. Was there a second? Okay, so is there a new amendment that I need to record?
What's the
Dr.
to Gloria's?
So I'm just trying to make sure I have this recorded so that it can be reflected in the minute. So, so there was no second to Susan's amendment. I heard somebody say something about time, a month or 2 months, but I'm not clear if there was if that was an actual amendment that was being proposed.
2 months.
No, but I need like I move that we amend.
Okay, I moved that we amend the meeting to be extended, the committee to be extended for 2 months.
Is there a
Was there-
second?
Didn't you second, Dr. Shaheed?
I second that.
I accept that amendment.
So then,
Gloria, you had an amendment?
well, but this amendment has not been voted on.
Oh, we have to vote on the amendment. Okay.
I think, yeah, I believe so. I'm a little over my head on right now, but I'm doing the best I can to keep up.
We can vote on it to be safe.
I don't believe amendments have to be voted on. If the original maker of the motion accepts the amendment, that's what's needed, and because we're voting on the whole motion.
That is correct.
Okay, great, perfect. Thank you all.
And
I
for
need-
clarification, Dorothy, and
Yes.
Susan, the time frame is just for the committee, not for the training, this deeper dive.
So
Because
that is my understanding of the amendment. And I want to point out, I posted into the chat, I copy and pasted from the founding document for this committee. I put the timeline in there. So you can see like June 2020, there should be a written report, et cetera. And then I'm having there is something about the dissolution. Did not copy everything. Hold on, I'll add back in.
Dorothy, can you email this to us later? Because I don't think I can save chat.
I will certainly email it to you later, but I want to make sure that we have it for discussion right now. So I'm adding in the last part that got cut off. And I'll email out to everyone.
So that we're clear on the motion, the purpose of the extension is to allow us to take that deep dive that was recommended by the superintendent.
So
That was the purpose of the motion for the
current,
extension.
I'm sorry, Ray, I'm lagging that. I'm not intending.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm old, so I'm used to it.
The way that I have the motion now with Susan's amendment is that I move that we recommend to the board to extend the work of the committee by 2 months as recommended by Dr. Adams to hold a series of workshops.
That
And
is correct.
There was an amendment from Gloria to
Yes,
include.
Gloria had one. You want to
So
make it, Gloria?
I need someone to make that motion and then
Come on, Gloria.
I move to amend the motion to include public participation in the workshop process. I don't know.
If someone seconds, I'll certainly accept it.
I
second.
second.
who second? Was
I
that
accept.
Susan? Thank you.
Are there any other amendments? All right, Ms. Bell.
I don't know if she's still here. I can do it.
She is.
Is she? Okay, I'm sorry. I can't really.
I'm
struggling.
here.
Thank you.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins,
Yes.
Ms. Turk,
Yes.
Ms. Nolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Dr. Shaheed,
yes.
Banks,
Yes.
motion passed.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Ms. Bell?
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Rhodey Collins,
Yes.
Ms. Turk,
Yes.
Ms. Nolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Dr. Shaheed,
Yes.
Ms. Banks,
Yes.
meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Be
Have a good
safe.
weekend.
Thank
Keep
you.
those masks on and stay safe.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Huh? Woo-wee. They know now.